In this third tutorial, I'm going to go over the gross anatomy of the male and female reproductive organs, and I'll also go over the gamete production and the anatomy of the gametes. So we'll start with the female side. So oocyte production begins with a primordial follicle, which consists of just a basement membrane, follicular cells in the oocyte, okay, the egg. It then transitions into the primary follicle with an increase in the size and number of granulosa. This is stimulated by the follicle stimulating hormone. So at the top you can see that these follicular cells have just increased in size to become granulosa cells, and if we imagine this side, is there an increase in the number of granulosa cells. Okay, and then from there, the primary follicle becomes a secondary follicle, and this is characterized by the formation of an antrum, which is basically a space within the follicle, and within that space there is estrogen being produced because these granulosa cells are what produce the estrogen. We can also see that the connective tissue around the egg, the theca, has separated into a theca interna and a theca externa. The next stage is a mature/Graafian follicle. This is characterized by an increase in the size of the antrum, you can see here, and the formation of a stalk, which is just the granulosa cells. This name of the stalk is the cumulus oephorus. Now, if we would imagine that ovulation has begun and the egg has left this follicle, we can see that it's in the ovary and it gets put out and picked up by these fimbriae, which are like fingers which try to waft in the egg. The egg then goes through the fallopian/uterine tube, and then it goes into this place called the ampulla, and if fertilization were to occur, it would happen in this area most likely. So then if the egg isn't fertilized, it would continue through the uterine tube into the uterus. The uterus at the top has a fundus, and the walls are made up of myometrium, aka smooth muscle, which allows it to expand during pregnancy and also contract during childbirth. And on the inside there is the endometrium, which is like a layer of blood that would support the growing fetus if fertilization were to occur. And if it doesn't, the endometrium would exit via the vagina and through the cervix, which is usually a barrier between the uterus and the outside world. And this vagina is used for kind of the output of either a child during childbirth or the endometrial lining, and it's also where the sperm is able to enter the uterus. Okay, now we'll go on to sperm production. So if we see over here, it's a cross-section of a seminiferous tubule. So if you imagine in the testes, there's just heaps of different tubules wrapping around everywhere, and if you were to get a tube and cut it out, and cut a little wedge out, and put it under a microscope, this is what it would look like. So these brown cells are the Sertoli cells, the purple cells are the spermatogonia undergoing spermatogenesis, and then up here is like the connective tissue around the seminiferous tubule. So these cells are the Sertoli cells, and you can remember that because S for sperm, so that's where the sperms sit, so the Sertoli cells. And up here I wrote little crosses to signify the blood-testes barrier, because that's important, because if white blood cells or any of your immune cells could get to these cells, they would probably kill them because they would detect them as being foreign, since they have different DNA because of meiosis that had occurred. So that's why that's there. Okay, now let's go into the sperm production. It begins with spermatogonia, the sperm stem cells. So that undergoes mitosis. So it's the same cell, it just became two cells, and then one cell stayed up there, and then one cell went through that blood-testes barrier. Now that one cell, the primary spermatocyte, then underwent meiosis 1 to become secondary spermatocyte. So 1 became 2, then meiosis 2 occurred, and that created 4 different cells, and those ones are called spermatids. So that these 4 up here, it's the process of spermatogenesis. You can see that these spells down here kind of look like sperm already, so that's spermatogenesis, but to go from kind of looking like a sperm to a sperm, that is spermiogenesis. So they're two different things. From spermatids to the sperm, it just loses a residual body, which is all of the things that the sperm don't need. So we'll get down to what a sperm is. So up here it would have all of the normal things that a cell has, like cytoplasmic reticulum and all of that. But since this sperm only has to deliver DNA to the egg, it just cuts down everything to the bare minimum. So if we go from right to left, we can see an acrosome, which is filled with enzymes, and the enzymes are important for breaking down the egg cell wall in order to fertilize the egg. So if it didn't have an acrosome, it wouldn't be able to get into the egg and fertilization couldn't occur. Next is the head, which contains the DNA of the sperm, and that's important because the sperm needs to deliver the DNA in order to fertilize the egg. Next is the midpiece, which contains all the mitochondria, and mitochondria are needed in order to give the sperm energy to swim, and it swims using its tail, which is the last part. Now, the sperm isn't completely done in the testes. If we go into the gross anatomy, it goes from the testes into the epididymis, and the epididymis is where they undergo their final maturation. That takes about 10 to 14 days, and it's also where it condenses all the sperm, so it gets rid of the extra fluids in there, so it's as concentrated as it can be. It then goes through the vas deferens, which is about 45 centimeters long, goes from the testes all the way up and through the body, and it connects back to the prostate. There the sperm is mixed with secretions from the seminal vesicles and the prostate. The seminal vesicles secrete things like fructose, prostaglandins, and clotting proteins. The prostate has an acidic secretion which contains citrate, phosphate, calcium, and prostate-specific androgen. During ejaculation, the seminal vesicle secretions, the prostatic secretions, and the sperm would be ejaculated through the urethra and out through the penis, which consists of a corpus cavernosum, which is a big one that fills with blood and allows for an erection to occur. And then there's the corpus spongiosum, which wraps around the urethra and prevents it from being closed off. So that's a flow of the male anatomy. So we'll do a quick overview. Oocytes consist of a primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, and a mature follicle. And it starts with the ovary, goes through the fallopian tubes, through the uterus, and then out through the vagina if no fertilization were to occur. And then sperm production starts with spermatogonia, then goes to a primary spermatocyte, then to a secondary spermatocyte, then to spermatids, and then finally to sperm. And the sperm consists of an acrosome, a head, midpiece, and a tail. And then once it's got out of the testes and into the epididymis, goes through the vas deferens, where it joins with seminal vesicles and goes through the prostate, where it then is able to go out through the penis. And that's an end to the anatomy and gamete production.